Before the 1960s, everyone used to be skinny. Obesity is 10 times as prevalent in the US today as it was before then, but their diet was not at all what you'd expect. If you listen to modern health advice, then you're probably thinking they ate salmon and rice with broccoli for most meals. You probably think that they didn't eat very many calories, staying at the recommended 2,000 a day, along with low fat intake, especially low in saturated fat, and definitely little to no sugar. But no, that's much closer to how we eat today. In fact, rates of so-called healthy eating and awareness of the alleged harms of these factors are at an all-time high. I've got some historical records here that are honestly astonishing, and we're gonna go through what it was like to eat back then, back when everyone was skinny. Now, there's this common narrative that we've been eating more since the 1960s until now, and that increase in calories is directly proportional to the amount of weight that we've gained and the amount of obesity that's prevalent in the country, which is true. But what they won't tell you is that before the 1960s, we were actually eating pretty similarly to when the obesity epidemic took off. In fact, if you look at the calorie intake from 1909 up to around 1940, it was right around 3,500 per day. Whereas in the 80s and early 90s, it was again right in that range. But in this time frame, obesity increased by about 10-fold, which really begs the question, what exactly were we eating? If we go back to the 1939 USDA Book of Agriculture, it can give us some clues. Looking at this table here, we can see that we actually ate tons of calories. This is calorie intake stratified by income, and as you can see, the people who made the most money would typically eat the most calories, with some of the richest people eating 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. And the thing that's interesting is that the people who made the most money, who would be eating the most calories, would actually be the least active. People who made less money were typically laborers, while people who made more money had more executive roles and may have even had access to cars. Mind you, this is for a fully grown man of 154 pounds who is considered moderately active. Now, they would definitely be more active on average than we are today, but I'll get into why that doesn't explain all of this at the end. Then once we go beyond calories, we can actually see the breakdown of what we were eating. In this table here, you can see the most common foods that we would eat. So you can see near the top for the carb products, you have cereal products, so things like grains, you have potatoes and sweet potatoes, and then you have pure added cane sugar and syrups. And this added sugar was over 100 pounds a year. And if you average that out to a per day basis, you're looking at 137 grams of added sugar a day. This doesn't even take into account the sugars from things like fruit or honey or milk. This is just pure added sugar. All in all, if we use these foods to calculate an average day of eating in 1939, we can see what we come up with. So based on these numbers, you're looking at 430 grams of carbohydrates per day, which is over half of your calorie intake. And like I said before, 137 grams of added sugar. Then your total fat consumption is actually over 100 grams of fat a day, which would make any cardiologist faint. You're looking at 120 grams of fat per day, which is around 34% of your calories. Meanwhile, protein was pretty moderate to somewhat high at around 110 grams. All told, you're looking at 3,200 calories a day, and this is for an average person, not even for an average fully grown man. We can see people were eating lots of potatoes, they were eating bread, they were eating fruits and vegetables, and these numbers should be pretty accurate because while it is true that some of this food would go to waste, based on all the estimates that I've seen, I've never seen an estimate from this time period going above 10%. You're usually looking at around 5% of food getting wasted, especially during those economic times in the 30s and the fact that food was just harder to come by than it is today. So based off of these numbers, what would an actual day of eating look like in the 1930s? Well, here's a sample day of eating. For breakfast, you have oatmeal and toast, a bowl of cooked oatmeal made from a third cup of dry oats. You have a tablespoon of sugar on the oatmeal, and you have a tablespoon of raisins, and then you have toast with butter and jam. You have 3 slices of white toast. You have 2 teaspoons of butter and 1.5 tablespoons of jam on your toast. Then you'll have some eggs and bacon. You have 1 fried egg and 2 or 3 slices of bacon, along with 1 cup of whole milk and a cup of coffee with 3 teaspoons of sugar and a splash of cream. Then for lunch, you get a ham and cheese sandwich. You get 2 slices of white bread, 2 ounces of ham, an ounce of cheddar cheese with some butter. Then you'll have a vegetable soup, a half cup of mixed vegetables, and a third of a cup of potato. You have some fruit, a medium apple, and a half cup of whole milk. And you'll also have some extra sugar in tea or coffee. Then for dessert, which you're also having at lunch because of all that sugar, you have a slice of fruit pie and you sugar in the filling of that fruit pie. And then you'll get another 15 grams of sugar in somehow. Maybe it's a small soda or some milk with some sugar. Then for dinner, you're gonna have meat and potatoes with gravy. So you'll have some roast pork or beef. That'll be about 3 to 3.5 ounces. You'll have mashed potatoes, a cup and a half of that. And then you'll have an extra ladle of gravy made with drippings and flour, along with vegetables. So you'll have green beans, carrots, and a small salad of lettuce with some dressing. And you'll also have some bread and butter. You'll have a dinner roll with a teaspoon of butter, a side of baked beans, and then for dessert, you're gonna have a little bit more sugar from your sugar sweetened drink, and you're gonna end it with a small scoop of ice cream. Now, if you're like most people, you probably just heard that and gained some weight, but apparently not in the 1930s. We have this other document here of the agricultural statistics from 1950, and we can see a lot of the same trends. So just briefly, some of the key notes here. You get 175 grams of carbs from grains, mainly rice and flour. You would have 4 cups of milk a day, according to these numbers. And what was really interesting to me was that there was no chicken even recorded here. In fact, the main meat that we were eating was pork, followed by beef and then some lamb. And the sugar consumption did not alter significantly in those 10 years either. Then we have another document here. This one's from 1955. This is called the Household Food Consumption Survey of 1955. And this involved people actually getting asked at length by certain officials about what their household was eating for a given person. So combining this with the other data, which was just pure consumption purchasing data, we can get an even better idea as to what people were eating around then. And once again, these numbers line up with what we've seen. If you look at table 2 here, you'll see people were drinking over 2 cups of milk a day, over a cup of ice cream per week, about 12 ounces in total of proteins, and over 8 ounces of that was meat and fish, the rest coming from eggs. You would have about a half pound of vegetables a day. You would get orange juice as well as 6 other ounces of other fruits, and you would have 92 grams of added sugar. Keep in mind, this is all nearly double what is recommended today. We're recommended to get no more than 50 grams of added sugar a day, but people in this time period were getting 100 or even more. Looking a little bit further in this document, I was actually very surprised to see that they were on a pretty high fat diet. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that typically if you're going to be eating a high carb or high sugar diet, we suggest that you try to keep the fat below about 30%. But apparently in 1955, that didn't matter. In fact, they were getting 44% of their calories from fat, which was slightly ahead of carbs at 43% of total calories. And that came out to a whopping 155 grams of fat per day and a ridiculous 65 grams of saturated fat a day. Slightly more came from monounsaturated fat at around 66 grams a day. And the polyunsaturated fat intake was much lower back then. So if we look at linoleic acid, which is the main fat found in things like vegetable oils, you'll see that it's estimated around 16 grams a day, which is around 4.5% of calories. Now, this is after the launch of things like Crisco, and this is when corn oil was already, in full swing. And this is when these fats started to come more into favor in the media due to the American Heart Association and all of the hysteria around cholesterol. So you'll start to see this number go up as the years go on, to where we're at today, where we eat as much as triple the amount of linoleic acid from these vegetable or seed oils today. But all in all, based on these numbers, you're looking at, again, 3,200 calories per day for an average person. And what's interesting in terms of the carbohydrate content was that about half of the carbs that were eaten were from sugars. It wasn't all from starches. It was actually pretty split right down the middle between sugars and starches. And this was likely a good thing, as the metabolism of sugar can actually boost the metabolism of other types of carbohydrates like those in starches. So we got a good glimpse into the 1930s, 40s, and 50s and what exactly they were eating. But this does not necessarily mean that you should start eating this right now, because a lot of things have happened over the last 75 or so years that have made our metabolisms and our health incapable of eating such a diet. So the real question is why? Why were people able to eat all of this fat, all of this sugar, all of these carbs, and they remained lean and relatively healthy based on what we can tell? Now, the big thing that people will say is that they moved more, they were much more active, which is true to a certain degree, but that doesn't exactly explain this entire discrepancy. In fact, if you look at some of the most generous estimates from recent studies, the average man in 2010 only burned about 100 calories a day less throughout the workday than a man in 1960. We also walk significantly less today as well. But again, you're looking at around 4,000 to 5,000 steps a day for the average person, whereas back then you're looking at around 10,000 steps. So it is a difference, but it's not as big of a difference as one might think, and it's definitely not enough to explain this entire phenomenon. So my take here is that it's not just one thing, it's a ton of different factors that all come together to result in the obesity crisis that we have today. Death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. Just to name a few, I mentioned before the seed oils, the vegetable oils. These in animal studies have been shown to directly promote the gaining of fat. I've done an entire video on that. You should go check that out. Spending less time outside is terrible because we get less red light, we get less UV light, we get less blue light. These are all very protective against fat gain. And I've done a video about red light and fat loss and metabolism here. Our circadian rhythms are also very disrupted nowadays. We get a lot of artificial light, and the lack of that natural sunlight prevents our hormones and our metabolism from syncing properly. Again, I've also done another video on that here talking about leptin and the role of sunlight. The food we eat in general is just much less nutritious. So if you're looking at these foods, yes, they did eat a lot of so-called empty calories with sugar and bread and stuff like that, but they were also eating things like liver and eggs. They were eating lots of animal proteins, and they were also drinking lots of milk. All these foods are loaded with nutrients, and if you're not getting enough of these micronutrients, it can impair various pathways in your metabolism that can prevent you from burning off extra energy. We also have much worse gut health, so the rise of things like antibiotics, C-sections, our environments are overly sterilized. We don't really get into the dirt and get dirty anymore, which is important for our bacteria. We also have tons of food additives, which can mess with our gut. And once again, I've done an entire video about the gut's role in promoting obesity, regardless of calorie intake right here. And the list goes on and on and on. There's a number of different things that you can point to, which I've covered at length on Twitter, on this channel, and I'm gonna continue to do going forward. So the bottom line is you can't eat like this today because almost nobody has the metabolism of someone in the 1930s, 40s, or 50s. But if you want to get some one-on-one support with improving your metabolism, whether it's for fat loss or any other health goal that you have, I strongly suggest that you go check out Prism. At Prism, we have multiple different practitioners that you can work with that I'm highly involved with. We're constantly analyzing people's labs. We're doing deep dives on their metabolism and really getting down to the root cause of your health issues with a metabolic centric approach. It's seriously the top of the line service. So if you guys are interested in that, click the link here, book a free call, and we'll get you started. Finally, if you want to get some lab testing to do any assessments on your metabolism, you can do so through Revelation Diagnostics. All you got to do is go to the website, search for any labs you want, add it to your cart, and you can go to your nearest lab to get the labs done. No doctor required, and it's at a discount if you use code ANALYZE at checkout for 10% off. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.